All right, welcome back to part 3. The first rebellion we're going to talk about here is the Boston Impressment riot. Impressment is when commanders would come into port and force people into service. And so this is a revolt against that practice. So the British naval commander Knowles arrives at Boston Harbor, and he's refitting his ship, he's replenishing supplies, and many of his sailors had deserted because life aboard British vessels was unpleasant, so they would ditch their service. So Knowles ordered men that had not deserted to go around rounding up different random men from Boston and forcing them into service. And this was a common practice. British Navy did this all the time, basically kidnapping people and forcing them to be a part of the Navy. And especially happened in Boston quite a bit, and it really disrupted the economy when they would do this. So the next day, rioters went through, they started rampaging the town, seizing British officers and sailors. They captured a lieutenant, they captured a sheriff's deputy, they started freeing prisoners, and so they ended up marching on the governor's house, where they then beat up the deputy sheriff in front of the house, put him in stockades, and then the angry mob destroyed the governor's house, burned his barge. The governor ended up fleeing, and the result was that eventually this commander returned the men that he had taken. So that was one of these rare successes in revolts. Let's move on to the second one here. Again, we only have 3 left, including this one I just did, so 2 more. 1763, and this is in Pennsylvania. You may recall 1763 was the end of the 7 Years' War, which largely was over some Pennsylvania area, so right in that hot zone. And this is called the Paxton Boys Uprising, which sounds kind of like a fun gang of guys, but they're actually the worst. The Paxton Boys were 60 drunk guys, essentially, from Paxton, Pennsylvania, who went to a native settlement and slaughtered 20 innocent people. The Governor Penn, ordered them arrested and tried, and the people in Paxton, the frontier people, would not arrest the Paxton Boys because they agreed that something needed to be done about the native population. So this is kind of like Bacon's Rebellion in that it's frontier people versus rich city men, but really the ones who are suffering are the native population. So this is a continued frustration of frontier versus these wealthy. So eventually the frontier people led this march on Philadelphia to further display how upset they were that they were not getting protection they felt they needed. And so 600 armed men stormed Philadelphia, and they were promised a hearing. So the townspeople, the wealthier men, agreed to listen to their complaints, essentially, but still nothing was done. Okay, and the last one we're going to talk about is the Regulator movement, 1767 to 71. And this is in the Carolinas. I feel like I said that wrong still. 1767 to 1771. Okay, so we're getting real close to the Revolutionary War here. In the Carolinas, this is another frontier versus wealthy sort of situation. In the backcountry area, in these frontiers, they did not only did they not have the protection that they wanted, but they didn't have facilities either. So they wanted representation in government. They wanted jails, they wanted roads, they wanted courts, they wanted schools, they wanted all these things that people in towns have that they don't. So the area was quite divided between the wealthy plantation owners and the hardworking, scrappy frontier people. The people on the frontier threatened to march on Charleston, and when they did that, and this is in South Carolina, when they threatened to march on Charleston, they did end up getting local courts for their area out there on their frontier. In North Carolina, this was poor versus rich, same thing, frontier versus city, and this was in North Carolina, it was a disagreement over taxes. So the rioters ended up shutting down courts. They prevented taxes from being collected out in the frontier, and they actually formed their own militia. But in 1771, the official North Carolina militia came in, put down this rebel militia, and 7 of the leaders of that rebellion were hanged for their participation in that. So a lot of unhappy folks. You may be noticing some trends, and I'm going to want you to kind of pick up on that. Who's unhappy with whom in the colonies? And Reed Zinn, he talks about it a bit too. Who are the unhappy ones? Who are the ones being rebelled against? Kind of, you can even make a chart if you want. In fact, I think that's one of your assignments. So maybe go back through, kind of pick out who the unhappy and the decently happy people are in the colonies. And I will see you again next week. Have a good one.